All right.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Scale with Joy podcast. I am here with Eric Partaker. He is tuning in today from London, from across the pond, and he is a peak performance coach. And it's great to have you here, Eric. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Laura. I'm American as well, but have been living in London for nearly 20 years.
Yeah, that's funny because when I first heard you speak, I noticed that the British accent was just a touch there. So it sounds like you've been infiltrated.
Yeah. Well, after a couple of decades, it's kind of hard for it to not happen without you realizing it.
And so you're a peak performance coach. What led you into that career? So it sounds like you're an expat, and what made you decide to pursue that trajectory?
Yeah, well, I mean, my background is best summed up with the quote from John Lennon: "Life is what happens while we're busy making other plans." So nothing's really been intended; it's just sort of happened. So I started off as a consultant with McKinsey and Company, then joined Skype in its very early days, helped with the blitz scaling of that right before we sold to eBay about 15, 16 years ago. Then started a chain of Mexican restaurants throughout the UK, grew that throughout the UK. And the common thread throughout all of that was an obsession with entrepreneurship, leadership, and peak performance. And and that became what is now, my focus in business. So I basically help entrepreneurs and leaders scale not just their businesses, but also their leadership and themselves.
Very cool. So McKinsey, Skype, I mean, like little tiny companies nobody's ever heard of. So what made you, I mean, clearly you have an amazing business background, but what made you to decide to go all in on more of the performance and it sounds like mindset side of things?
Yeah. So at the moment, I work with 26 founders, CEOs, and what I think is lacking in the business coaching space is the integration of that kind of coaching with mentoring. So in the trenches experience, as well as taking in the totality of the person, right? So business and life is really just one thing, but it's all interconnected. And the focus on peak performance for me uh, is less about turning a human being into a Ferrari and performing at like a peak athletic level, and more that I define peak performance as operating at your fullest potential across all the areas of life that matter most. So three in particular: your health, your wealth, and your relationships. So that's the essence of peak performance for me, and I just felt that it was missing from the business kind of coaching and mentoring space.
And why do you think that leadership starts at home? I know you talk a lot about your family and how you lead your own family. Why is that so important for somebody like yourself who has so many external successes and the people you work with that it would be pretty easy to just kind of say, you know what, I'll let other people handle my home life, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it goes back about 10 years for me. I was boarding a plane on a return flight to London. And shortly after the plane reached cruising altitude, I felt quite a lot of pressure in my chest, which soon became pain down the left shoulder, left arm, got quite nauseous with sweating. The stewardess on board asked if there was a doctor, on board, who rushed to my attention. And the doctor said, "We need to land the plane immediately. I think he's having a heart attack." And the plane emergency landed in a small town in France. And they took me off into a waiting ambulance on the runway where they administered nitrates, opened up the arteries. And as the ambulance sped off to the local hospital, I looked up into the eyes of the paramedic looking down at me, and I said, "Please don't let me die. I have a 5-year-old son." And the next morning when I woke up, um, I was really unnerved by the very first thing that had come out of my mouth, because
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't anything It wasn't anything work related. It wasn't, please don't let me die, I need to finish redesigning the website.
Right.
You know,
Right.
and so that was like the light bulb moment for me, that I was working too hard at the price of my health and without paying attention to what mattered most, which clearly, was, those closest to me, right? Because when you think it's game over, whatever you say and think in that moment, that's your truth. Um, there's no chance for premeditation. There's no chance for hiding. And the truth that revealed itself was just very incongruent with my daily behavior. And so that prompted a journey to really focus on peak performance as I've described it, from a more holistic kind of balanced point of view, whereby we close that gap between our current and best selves, not just in the work front, but also on the health and home front. So to do that, I think you need to take a leadership, position in your home life. And I don't mean, that you're directing traffic, but that you recognize your role, within the family, as you recognize your role within a company, and you say to yourself, I'm going to do that role to the best of my abilities. I'm going to be a leader in my role. So yeah, that's the backstory for that.
It's so interesting. It's very perceptive of you to actually be able to look at it from an outside standpoint and have that realization. When I think a lot of executives would just say, well, that was like an emotional moment, or that was just something that flew out of my mouth. But now tomorrow I've got to get back to the to-do list because I've been in the hospital and like work is behind. What do you
Yeah.
think it is about you that made you decide, like, whoa, that was like an inciting incident for me?
Yeah. So I was fortunate, or unfortunate, however you want to look at it, to, have, something that nearly killed me kind of forced me to realize what I think actually the vast majority of the population, or many people, realize. You don't need to go through a health scare to look in the mirror and honestly assess whether or not you're truly doing your best at home, or if they're getting kind of what's left over compared
Mm.
to, what you deliver, um, on the work front. So I don't know if it's something different or unique about me. I can't say I'm special in that regard. I just think it's, again, I was fortunate to go through a moment that forced me to come to terms and take action on a feeling that, again, I think the vast, majority of people also have.
Yeah, so good. And I know you're such a big fan of creating values for your home, just like you would a business, like core values. And I'll be the first to admit that I've created core values for my own companies and other people's companies many times and have never even thought about doing it for my own family. Was this something that you started implementing after this pivotal moment in your life?
No, it actually, so there's two layers to that. So after that moment, um, in the years that followed, I started experimenting with different techniques to get me to show up on each of those domains, more powerfully, health, wealth, and relationships. And the one that had the kind of the greatest effect, the most power for me, um, was a technique involving 3 alarms, which I've written about, in my new book under the same title, the 3 alarms. And literally all I did was I thought of a best self identity in each of these 3 domains: on the health front, on the wealth. And when I say wealth, I mean both, making the money, like work, and what you do with it. You're generating wealth and what you do with it: health, wealth, and relationships. And then I thought of 3 words, or values that would describe the behavior of those identities. And then I just put in those 3 identities into my phone as alarms, thinking that, yeah, I'd benefit from having this reminder of what me at my best, as defined by me, is at the appropriate time of day, so that I could perhaps course correct in the moment, or maybe it would prompt a bit of reflection if I wasn't behaving consistently, with those identities. So I went ahead and put these 3 alarms in my phone. At 6:30 a.m., it said World Fitness Champion, and that's what went off. Not because I am one, I never will be, but that's the kind of identity I assume when I go to the gym in the morning. At 9 a.m., said World's Best CEO, to prompt the thought, how would the world's best CEO show up, decisive, inspiring, reliable. Those are some of the values that I associated with that. And then at 6:30 p.m., the most important one of all goes off for me, and it says world's best husband and father, to prompt the question, how would the world's best husband and father walk through that door right now? And I had 3 values associated with that as well, which were playful, loving, and laughter. And having that kind of intentionality just changes the way, when you, right before you walk in and you're like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be that.
Yeah.
and you think about, well, how does that version behave? And then it's not instantaneous, but when you have a target to shoot for, you can't but help measure your current behavior against that ideal, and over time you close that gap. So that was one way in which I approach values. So what does me at my best in the home front look like? What are 3 words that describe that? And then cueing that at the appropriate time of day. The second way I approach values, I actually learned from one of these CEOs that I coach. So he shared with me an exercise that he had done with his family, which I just thought was amazing, whereby they defined, what they as a family unit were at their best and what those key words were. And in his example, I mean, I can't remember all the words exactly, but basically the phrase was, are we doing this right? And the R was like, responsibly. The I was for integrity. The T was for, oh gosh, I can't remember, trustworthy or something. And then it wasn't spelled correctly. It was 2 E's. And I think one was, excellence. And then the other was, empathetically or something like that. And so I just thought that was a very nice way of thinking about values as well, and a way to involve the whole family. So yeah, I can't really take credit for that second one or approach to doing that. That came from a client of mine. But in either instance, whether you think about it for yourself or you do it together with your family as a unit, having a set of words that guide your behavior is as powerful at home as it is, for a company.
Yeah. So powerful. I love that. When we think about peak performance, a lot of times it comes from habits, and the habits that we have both in our personal life as well as work. How do you view that separation between personal and home and work time? Is there certain characteristics or routines that you have found to be really useful when balancing the two? And I know balance is it's a sticky word, but the best way I can describe it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I just want to comment actually on your point about balance being a sticky word. It's funny. It's like when somebody goes against the grain, for example, and says something like, oh, balance is, hogwash. That doesn't really exist. It's not possible. It's really tempting to just kind of like join that, and just for the sake of being contrarian and all. But there is something to balance. There's nothing wrong with balance. And I think people need to not like over egg, what the word means. What you're really saying when you say you want balance is nothing more than that you want to feel that you're doing all the things that you should be doing, that you would like to do at work, for your health, at home. And there's nothing wrong with that. We should aspire to that. The way I, create balance is, a few things routine wise. So one is, I both recognize and appreciate the evidence that clearly supports the power of exercise with your mood and your positivity, and and keeping your energy levels high. You don't want to show up at home at the end of a day and be completely depleted, which makes you, prone to irritability and disagreeable and unhelpful and all of that. So you have a duty and a responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen, not just for that sake, but your own health and longevity as well. So, starting the day with some morning exercise, even if it's just for 20 minutes, puts you in a good position, and it creates a hormonal mood boost that's equivalent in strength to taking an antidepressant. It lasts for about 12 hours. So that's one, habit or routine that I put in place. I'm also very conscious of how I work throughout the day. So again, I don't deplete myself of energy or feel like I'm, a rat bouncing around walls in a maze, desperately in search of a piece of chocolate or something. So what I do there is I divide my day up into maker versus manager time. So maker time for me is in the morning when my energy is at its highest and when I want to work on what's most cognitively demanding. And so I keep my mornings, free of meetings, relatively free. Of course, if I need to do something urgently, I will. And then in the afternoons, that's my manager time. So that's when I'll interact with others, whether internal or external meetings. Kind of like feel like I'm a light bulb. So, at the beginning of the day, I'm kind of bright and shining, 100% energy. I want to maintain that 100%, but in the afternoon, I need the energy of others as well. So it's like, well, come on, pile into this meeting. The three of us, we're each at 33% and we get 100% together. So that energy management and matching kind of energy to task in that way helps me work more productively and end the day with gas in the tank. And that would be then a segue to, my end of day and then evening kind of routines or habits. So I always end the day by, shutting it down, where I do a final check of my email. I look at my calendar for the next day. I choose the top 3 things I'm going to work on. And then because of how I divide my day into the maker versus manager time, I have that morning available to schedule those top 3 things in as appointments with myself, to which I show up as I would anyone else if it was with someone else. That gives me incredible freedom going into the evening because I know everything's covered. I'm not sitting there wondering what I need to do the next day or when I'm going to do it. I've already thought that through. And the last thing that I do before I leave my office is, and I work from home, is I leave my phone in the office.
Do you?
And if you're trying to show up as your superhuman self on the home front, well, then your telephone is your kryptonite. So leave the kryptonite out of sight, and that just helps your presence and helps you engage. All of those things, together, really help.
Does your phone stay in your office until the next morning?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So I don't use it as I don't use my phone as an alarm, because if you go to bed early enough, you don't need to rely on it to wake up in the morning. And then if you do, we have an old school alarm clock where, if you do need that, use that rather than your phone.
Like a clock that rings.
Yeah, exactly.
Like one of those.
Before, it's like, it is funny when we say this, right? Because it's like our kids don't know this, but, I'm 45 and I remember still using payphones. And I remember when I was talking about this the other day with somebody and we were laughing about, hey, remember when you used to go, meet other people and you just knew where to go and it somehow worked out. And then the first big advance I remember was like pagers. People started to have pagers.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I'm like a few years younger than you, but not much.
Yeah. You got the payphone and you call the number back and all of that. But yeah, I mean, just, there's this concept called keystone habits, which, if you just do that one thing, it has such a huge impact on your life that it creates this positive ricochet effect elsewhere. And one of those keystone habits without a doubt is, I encourage anybody listening, see what happens when you quite literally leave your phone in the office off. It's, you have no choice but to be present because you're not distracted anymore.
Yes. This is fascinating. I'm committing during this podcast that I'm going to do this for a week. I'm going to see what happens.
Yeah, do it.
And the first thought that comes to my mind when you're sharing this is that my kids are little enough that they don't have a phone, right? They're 6 and 8. And if I want them to be off their phones when they're teenagers, I should probably start modeling it now. Like that was the first thought that I had when you were sharing this.
Yeah.
And it's an awesome challenge. I'm so glad you brought this up. It was like one of those small things that I think, like you said, is a keystone habit that can make such a huge difference for people, especially for us high achievers that always feel like we need to be on, which is so many of you who are listening to this right now. And I'm sure built much like Eric and I. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I just want to comment on another thing that you said, which, is quite interesting as well, because you said, I want to do that, to model the behavior. And if we just connect that back to leadership starting at home, because by far the best way to lead in any situation, whether at home, at work, on the basketball court, wherever, is to model the behavior that you seek. And our kids, they pick up everything that we do. Mm-hmm. If you're in a stress situation and you raise your voice, they will start, when they're in stress situations, raising their voices. If you get stressed easily and start to show signs of it quite visibly, then your children will become easily triggered, show signs of stress very, very easily, and and act in ways that won't be helpful for them in the long run. So that they're picking up absolutely everything, and they learn more by that. Children learn more through passive learning in that way than they do, in anything that you do actively. I mean, just for one, the time that you passively teach without even knowing, for example, ends up being 95% of the time. And the other active teaching time, the 5%, it just has no chance to compete against the 95. So I just thought it's a really good point. It's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So as we wrap up, in one word or a few words, what's the secret, do you think, to reaching your peak potential in both work and life?
Oh, consistency.
Mm.
Yeah, that's it. Consistency. Don't be try to be like consistently great. Just be great at being consistent. Just if you just do, if you're not even like, if you're just 80%, I did 80% as good as I could, but if you do that every day, like that's tough. That's actually harder than trying to nail, a month of 90s and 100s only to drop down to 50s and 40s for 3 months.
Yeah. Right. It's so interesting. It takes more discipline to be consistent and really looking at, I think, your internal beliefs, because your brain often wants to be very inconsistent.
Yeah.
When we bump up against things, which is the biggest challenge. So you've shared so much value today, and I'm so appreciative. If people want to reach out to you and they want to learn more about services you provide or just connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah. Well, thanks again for having me on the show, and thanks for everyone who's listened so far. So if you head to, so first of all, I'd like to offer a free digital copy of my new book, The 3 Alarms, which goes into a lot of the concepts that we discussed on the show today with a lot more depth. And of course, you can go to Amazon as well and buy it there. But as a thank you for listening, you can just grab a free digital copy from my website. So if you just head over to Eric with a C, ERIC, Partaker, PARTAKER, ericpartaker.com. and you can grab a look for the 3 alarms. That's the name of the book, and you can get a free digital copy there.
That's wonderful. We'll put it in the show notes too, so that people, if they're driving right now, they don't have to worry about writing it down. They can just go to the podcast site and look at this episode. So thank you so much for being here. It was a joy to have this conversation. You provided a perspective that I think is rarely spoken about, and it's greatly appreciated. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I appreciate it.